Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 96 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the Observer's Notebook and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thanks for downloading and listening. The Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomenon, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. This podcast depends upon you and donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon. You can give as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast and 1 year's membership to the ALPO. You can help us out by going to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/Observer's Notebook. And if you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $18 a year. For more information, visit us on the internet at alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find us on the Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And yes, this here podcast has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now, episode 96 with John ONeal, and we're going to talk about how do you plan for an evening's night at the telescope. Sounds exciting. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to the Observer's Notebook podcast. Today we have a special guest, John ONeal, ALPO member and all-around great amateur astronomer. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Oh, thank you, Tim. Oh, and by the way, I just got my new ALPO card, my re-enlistment card, so you're going to have to put up with me for another year.
Oh, fantastic. I like that. More the merrier. That's
All
only
right.
$18 a year for you listeners, too. So,
Yeah.
Before we get into it, why don't we just give everybody a little bit of background about yourself?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm an amateur astronomer. I like to do imaging is my main thing in astronomy. I like to take pictures of the night sky. I like to take pictures of the sun and the planets. And pretty much everything I do revolves around that. I also do a lot of public outreach, well, up to this February when everything came to a screeching halt because of the COVID virus. But in a nutshell, that's pretty much it. Just a average Joe amateur astronomer having a great time and enjoying it.
That's good. Now, this topic we're going to talk about today, planning your nightly observing session. I follow you on Facebook, and it seems like every day you're posting images from the night before. So you're obviously very active with observing every night. And so
every night that I can.
True. So what first sparked your interest in astronomy?
Well, I think it had a lot to do with the world at the time that I was a child. I was born in 1954, so I was becoming conscious of the world in the early 60s. And, of course, we all know what was going on then. We had the space race going on with Russia, and our president in 1963 came on TV and announced that we're going to put men on the moon within a decade. And we had rocket launches in, well, it's not Kennedy Space Center. It is now, but back then it was called Cape Canaveral down in Florida. And there was just a lot going on in science and scientific endeavors, as far as people exploring the oceans and the heavens and all our natural world. So Astronomy was the thing that I think caught my attention the most. I was one of those kids that always was asking questions, what is the sun and what is the moon and what are stars? And, I'd ask my parents and my aunts and uncles and cousins questions like that, and none of them knew the answers.
And you couldn't Google it.
No, there was no internet out there. So in fourth grade, I met Mr. Wright, my science teacher. And he said, I'm going to answer all your questions. I'm going to tell you what the sun and the moon and the stars are. And that just fired me up and got me started, I guess.
Wow. So that's basically the person that influenced you to get involved in astronomy?
Yes.
Fantastic. Now, you have a number of telescopes. What was your very first?
Oh, my very first. I'll never forget that scope. Matter of fact, I still own it some 50 years later. It was a Sears and Roebuck 60 millimeter refractor that I bought at a auction house. I saved up my pennies from my paper route and working at the local store. I had $15 in my pocket. I went to the auction that day resolving that if they had a telescope, I was going to buy one. And I got it for $7.
Wow.
So that's going to become the finder scope on this new scope that I'm building right now. It's a 5-inch F10.
Cool. Oh, my.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a refractor guy, aren't you?
I am. I really like refractors. They're pretty versatile instruments. But I like the other scopes, too. I like the Ritchie Creightons, the reflectors. But, yeah, I think when it comes down to it, the ones that get used the most are the refractors.
Okay. So what's your current equipment?
Oh, gee.
We have 2 hours if you want to spend.
My wife's not behind me, so I guess I can go into this. No, I've got less than a dozen, I'd say. I've got an 8-inch Astrotech imaging Newtonian. I've got a 6-inch Ritchie Crichton.
Nice.
6-inch, 5-inch, 4-inch, 3-inch, 2-inch refractors. I've got the James Vann Solar Prominence Telescope out in my shed.
Oh, my.
Yeah, I'm still working on that. It's a pretty complex instrument, and all the parts haven't come quite together yet for it to be finished.
Right.
And I'm building a spectrohelioscope.
I remember seeing parts of that, on your Facebook page.
I really enjoy the telescopes. And the thing for me is, it's like, if I can give an analogy, consider a auto mechanic. He's got a box of tools. And each tool has a purpose and a different size and a different dimension to do different things. And for astronomical imaging, you need the right tool for the job as well as an auto mechanic does. So I've got long focal length scopes, short focal length scopes, medium focal length scopes, large aperture scopes, small aperture scopes. So no matter what I want to take an image of, I've pretty much got it covered at this point.
Yeah, weren't you also doing
you
radio?
You gotta realize, though, I didn't just go out and buy a dozen telescopes. This is stuff we've accumulated. Well, you're about my age.
Right.
This is stuff we've accumulated over a lifetime.
Right. This is true. Yeah. Now, weren't you also dabbling in radio astronomy? I thought you were.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I do. I've built, let's see, 1, 2, 3 different radio telescopes. One is a super SID receiver, which is really cool. This thing sits here 24/7 and it monitors ionization of the atmosphere. So we all know if there's a huge solar coronal mass ejection on the sun, it sends ions into our atmosphere, which ionize the particles in our atmosphere. And my solar telescope sits here and monitors the ionization. So when you see a sudden peak in the ionization and a gradual coming back to normal, you know we've been hit by a coronal mass ejection. So my computer sits here and gathers this stuff up 24/7, and then every day it sends a chart to Stanford University, and that's how they monitor solar activity on the sun, by citizen scientists all over the world accumulating this data and sending it to them.
That's awesome. That's very cool.
And let's see, the other telescope was it's called the Itty Bitty Radio Telescope. And if you Google that, you can find plans to make your very own Itty Bitty Radio Telescope. And basically, it's a satellite dish and a satellite dish receiver, signal strength receiver. And when you point it at the sun, it recognizes the radiation coming from the sun and causes your meter to move.
Okay.
And a little beep to sound. So it's nice to take this stuff to outreach events and let kids drive it around the sky and point it at the sun and see that when they point at the sun, something happens. So, they're getting to do science firsthand. I think that's pretty cool.
That is. Wow. Now, having all of this equipment, what's the first thing you do when you decide you're going to go out tonight at the telescope? You have a plan?
I do. Very first thing's the weather. Weather
Okay.
is critical to me, especially, maybe not so much if you're imaging. You can get through some uncomfortable experiences just looking and observing. But for imaging, you want to make sure there's no clouds in the sky anywhere. You want to make sure your seeing's good. Your transparency's good. You don't want to go out imaging if you got the jet stream overhead, because that's going to create shear in your images, and it's just going to play general havoc with you. So the very first thing I do is check the weather. And used to be, back in the day, we all used the Clear Sky Clock, which was a really good weather information site, but it's set to specific locations. So if my specific location is set up to the south of me and the weather's coming out of the north, well, then that station doesn't do me much good. So now we've got a couple really nice weather programs out there. One's called Mateo Blue.
Okay.
And the other one's called Astrospherics. And these programs allow you to look at the weather at your house. You're not looking 20 miles down the road or 50 miles in an opposite direction. You're looking at your house and seeing what is going on there. And I've had this thing tell me it's going to rain in 10 minutes, and in 10 minutes, by golly, it started raining. So
wow,
it's pretty accurate for the most part.
Okay.
Sometimes it's not real accurate, but mostly Astrospheric and Mateo Blue are. Okay. And then you've got all the NOAA, weather links you can go to. There's a lot of places to go and get weather, but once I get the weather reports and decide, okay, I'm going out, then it's time to start deciding, okay, what am I going to look at tonight? What do I want to image? And, well, from experience, I know what's pretty much in the sky every night. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you understand, Tim. You've been around a long time. We just know what's in the sky because we've been watching it for 40 years, and we know that you got a bunch of fixed objects that every April, Leo's going to be rising at dusk.
Right.
Every November, December, Orion's going to be rising at dusk. We know these things, and so we sort of have a generalization, a good idea of what's up there to look at.
Okay.
Like right now, I'd encourage anybody that wants to go out and see some really fun stuff. Leo is getting near zenith at dusk. It's not quite there yet, but it's close. Go out and look for galaxies. There are tons and tons and tons of galaxies in Leo. And some of them are pretty bright. Yeah. And they're well within the range of small telescopes. So if you've got any kind of a telescope, go on out and search around Leo, and look for galaxies. Same with planets. We know that Venus is the only bright planet in the sky right now. The rest are all up in the morning. So, but how does the people that don't just already know this figure it out? And for them, there's quite a bit of stuff out there. There's a lot of apps you can download onto your phone. I think I got some written down here. Sky and Tell has an interactive software suite on the web. Astronomy Magazine has a website. Celestron, Orion telescopes. All these places have sites where you can go and they'll show you what's in the sky tonight. And that's a real good place for a beginner to go and look at the sky, and you can actually tell it, show me what's in the south or in the west or the east or the north, in case you only have one horizon available to you. If you've got a bunch of trees around your house and you can only see one direction, you can tell these programs, I want to look east, for example, and it'll show you what's up in the east. So a lot of them are really intuitive. They're easy to use.
Now, you like to photograph, galaxies and clusters and things like that as well. If you went out last night and did some photography, and if you're going out tonight, are you going to shoot the same things, or are you going to look for something different?
Yeah, I would. Well, if I was happy with what I did last night, I'll go for something different tonight.
Okay.
If I shot something last night, like I was shooting M51 last week, and I got some nice images, but there's still a lot of noise in them. So I need to capture more signal, more light, more images of M51 in order to improve my image. So some nights I'll go back out and shoot the same things over and over. Or sometimes, depending on what I'm doing, I'll shoot different focal lengths. For instance, just last month, we had Venus transit through the Pleiades.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great. But I shot it like at a real wide exposure so I could get the entire Pleiades in.
Okay.
Then I shot it at the next night I went out and shot it zoomed way in so you could actually see Venus and only a little portion of the Pleiades, but it gave you a different perspective on it.
Okay.
So
you plan those.
Avoiding your question.
No,
go ahead.
You plan those things ahead of time, though.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So it sounds like you also plan around astronomical events like Venus going through the Pleiades.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So how much time do you spend in your planning stages?
Not a lot. I mean, I'll spend. Well, one nice thing, Tim, I've set up a series of macros on my computer, and I can just step through them. So it's like I start with the weather. I hit Astrospherics. I go to Mateo Blue. I go to the NOAA site. I look at the jet stream. I look at the seeing and the aerosol depth in the sky. After I look at that, then I go to what's up tonight in case there's some sort of an event that's like short-lived that I can only see tonight.
Right.
And then I'll go into the more or less generalizations. Okay, what's up in the entire sky tonight? And sometimes I can get through all that in 5 or 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes a little longer, especially if I don't see anything that I really want to image that night. Or let's say I've got the 8-inch Newtonian set up in the observatory right now. I'm going to look for objects to match that telescope.
Okay.
So it's got a lot of aperture and a wide, fast field of view. So I'm going to be looking for big objects with a lot of fine details that I can resolve with the 8 inches of aperture, but have a wide enough field of view with that fast, short focal length to fit everything in.
Okay.
Whereas if I've got the 6-inch Ritchie Crichton, it's got a real long focal length, I'm going to look for items more like planetary nebula,
right,
or the Ring Nebula.
Things that you have to put a little power on.
Yeah. So,
okay.
I normally don't spend a lot of time planning.
It sounds like you've got your routine pretty much down too. Plus, you've been doing it so long, you know what's in the sky tonight without using a planetarium software to figure it out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are there other tools you use?
Yeah, there are. Let's see. I wrote a couple things down here if I can find them. Oh yeah, the phone app. There's a lot of, well, whether you got an iPhone or an Android or whatever you got, there's a lot of programs. To list a few, there's Star Tracker. Star Tracker is real nice. Celestron has a site called Sky Portal.
Okay.
That's very user friendly. If you're searching for anything in particular, you can get into the programs like International Space Station Detector,
right.
Heavens Above, where that'll tell you when there's going to be.
Site.
It is. Heavens Above, you have to give it your location, and then it'll tell you when things are going to be going right over your house, like the space station or the Starlink satellites, or just about any other thing that might be transiting your house. It can tell you about it. Astro Calendar is nice. It lists objects by date that are going to be happening for the whole year. So I keep an eye on that. I check it at least monthly, just to keep track of, when's the next meteor shower coming, or what are the planets, Jupiter, Saturn, the bright planets, going to be transiting anything of note that I might want to take a picture of. You know, when you're doing astroimaging, it's a lot like regular photography. Sometimes just taking a picture of Jupiter isn't enough. For instance, when Venus transited the Pleiades last week, it's like everybody in the world was out taking pictures of that.
Right.
So if you go out and you take the same picture that a million other people did, well, what's the chances of people looking at your picture and liking it any better than any of the others? Because they all look the same.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to find a hook, something that'll make my picture stand out.
All right.
And that's one of the reasons I did a 6-panel mosaic of Venus and the Pleiades, because I could zoom in and get a whole lot of detail, but still get the entire Pleiades in there. So, I always try to find something different and something exciting and unusual that will catch people's imagination.
Yeah, I see a lot of astro photos come across my screen and Facebook and things like that, but I've always stopped and look at yours because you're always focusing on it's like the right thing.
Oh, thank you. I try. I really do.
Yeah. Now, how many hours do you spend at the telescope during an evening?
Well, that's a loaded question there. Back in the day when we had film cameras, I spent many, many, many long hours on any given night at the eyepiece of the telescope, hand guiding, because that's how we did it back then.
Right.
Today, everything's pretty much automated. So I go out to the observatory, open everything up, plug the camera into the laptop, and tell it, okay, take 150 pictures of this, take 15 darks, take 15 flats, take 15, calibration frames. And then the camera gets busy and I have nothing to do. So recently I went out and bought a Dobsonian.
Really?
I bought a 10-inch Meade. I think they're called light bridge telescopes.
Okay.
It's a truss tube 10-inch Meade. And I bought that. And now, while I'm not busy tracking, I'm just sitting there at the observatory with nothing to do. I'll pull that Dobsonian out of the shed and I'll go out and do some observing.
There you go.
And I'm really enjoying it. guys used to tease me and say that John ONeal doesn't even own an eyepiece. He never looks through telescopes.
I've heard a lot of astronomers don't own eyepieces anymore, and that bothers me. It really does.
Well, it's like I'm a kid in a candy store again. I've been doing this for 5 decades now, and I'm just to the point where I'm starting to look through telescopes, and I'm having a great time.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I've dabbled with astrophotography in my life, and I've got the equipment to do it. But it's just like I just like putting my eye to the eyepiece and seeing what's there with my own eye. And if I want an astrophoto, I'll go download one off the internet.
Yeah, and you're in a large group of people. I know many people. I belong to several astronomy clubs because I like it so much. So I know lots of people that are amateur astronomers, and I'd say that a very large percentage of them are strictly observers only. And I don't have a problem with that. I think it's cool. There's a lot of niche avenues in astronomy. Some guys are into double stars. My golly, I know a guy, I think he knows in his head where every single double star in the sky is and what magnitude both components are and what color each star is. And I mean, how these guys fill their head with all that knowledge, stay sane is beyond me, but they do it. And, they're really, really good at it.
Yeah, well, that's the nice thing about amateur astronomy. There's so many different avenues.
Yes.
You could be and keep yourself busy.
Yes.
You can just measure double stars every night. That's a whole thing in itself. You can observe the planets every night or galaxies or do astrophotography.
Yep.
Do magnitude estimates of objects. I mean, it's just the hobby's amazing. I mean, it really is. It's just, there's something for everybody.
And then you get the guys, I don't know if you know Kevin Cobble, a lot of citizen scientist type guys that are out there doing real stuff like asteroid occultations. You can get as deeply into this hobby as you want to.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of room to do a lot of different things, and that's what's so amazing to me about it.
And the thing is, and you can do actual science, like what you do with measuring the coronal mass ejections coming in. I mean, that's science. Yeah,
it is. And that's something I can contribute and do without having to sit in front of a computer all day working at it. It just, once you get it set up, it just happens.
Yeah. Now
go ahead.
Yeah. You're going to take images during the evening. How much post-processing time do you actually spend on the images?
Well, I spend a lot of time working on each individual image. So you figure if you're doing lucky imaging, if you're out there taking lots and lots and lots of pictures to make one image out of, I may spend 4, 5, or 6 hours out there capturing images. And then I come in and I have to do a lot of gyrations to those images to process them. And I could spend 4, 5, or 6 hours on each one. If things are good, if we don't have Starlink satellites going through the image or helicopter fly through with flashing lights and all this good stuff that happens and clouds rolling in, and if you don't have none of that, it's pretty straightforward process, and I can process an image in sometimes as little as half hour to an hour.
Okay.
Other times takes me, like I said, 4, 5, or 6 hours if I got a lot of work to do, if I got a lot of noise in the image. But the fortunate thing is I can only take 1 or 2 images per night if I'm shooting 4, 5, or 6 hours on one image. So that means I only have 2 images to process the next day. So
that's true.
So I feel comfortable spending as much time as I need to get the job done right.
Okay. Now, do you document your observing sessions?
I wish I did. I don't. I used to as a young man. And back before, we didn't have computers back in the day. We didn't have internet. So I carried a steno tablet out in the field with me. And at every observing session, I wrote down what time I got there, who else was there with me, what we did, what images we shot, and what we looked at, and, magnitude estimates, all that stuff. And I kept it all in a log. And I still have those logs.
Yeah.
And it's so wonderful to go back and look and say, oh, look, here I went out with these 3 guys. They're gone now, but
yeah,
our memories of going out that night are right here recorded in my log. So, yeah, I wish I still did that and more people did that.
Yeah, I've got stacks of logs that I've done when I was younger. And it was interesting when I first thought about doing this podcast, I struggled with coming up with the name. And I'm sitting at my desk and I look over, I see all my notebooks, and on the front of them it says Observer's Notebook, and I went, well, there you go. There's a good name, Wow, I'm like, to me it fits too, because that's what that's what this podcast is. It's
exactly.
It was kind of serendipitous how it just popped into my. I glanced over my desk and there they were, and I'm like, oh, okay, that was easy. Yeah, but
wow.
But for if you were just starting out, would you recommend someone do a notebook?
I would definitely, absolutely. It's great to look back on, and there's times I've had this happen myself. Before I started I use backyard EOS now with my Canon, and backyard EOS is real nice. It keeps an EXIF file with all your data in it. And I can look at that information and know, okay, I shot this at this exact moment.
Okay.
On this date with this camera and this telescope and these filters, and it records all that information. So I kind of don't need a logbook. It's all there if I want to go back and dig the information out. But there's times when I go out and I'm not using that program, I'll just be shooting from the hip, and then later on it's like, okay, what did I shoot again last night?
Yeah. Well, that's it. Like I said, I'm not an astrophotographer. I'm a visual guy. So my notebooks, it's filled with sketches, date, time, scene conditions, transparency, all that kind of, what telescope, what eyepieces, what color filters I used. It's just, I would keep all my notes that way, and then I could go back later and say, yeah, what was that night that I saw that weird thing on the moon, and scan back through it. And I still do that today. Oh,
so. That's great. Yeah, I would highly encourage people to do that.
Just some kind of record of what you saw.
Yeah, it's a great historical archive, and it's something that you never know. 10 years down the road, somebody might come out and say, you know what, there was a supernova in Cygnus last 2 decades ago, and we're looking for anybody that shot that area at that time. Well, if you got your logbooks, you can go back through and say, hey, I just happened to be shooting there that night.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, look, I got a picture of that supernova.
That's true.
Yeah, it's very beneficial. It's a great idea.
Now, do you have any examples of when you had a plan, it was locked in, you knew what you wanted to do, and somehow it went off track because of optical or hardware, or you just got sidetracked because of something you saw or did?
It does, yeah. I think probably the most extreme case is one night this is when I still lived in Ohio, and we were all going up to Lake Erie because you got 4 miles of lake there with no lights in it. So it makes a great dark north. And so we were going up there to take pictures, and we got there and Aurora came on.
Oh.
So it's like, well, that observing plan shot. We're all shooting Aurora tonight.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a nice thing to happen.
Oh yeah. And other times things not so nice happen. I can't think of a particular instance off the top of my head, but there are always things that go bump in the night. Something doesn't work, or especially when you're doing imaging and you're using a computer and your Siedentop got updated that day, and the new update doesn't like your imaging software. So it's like, yeah, why couldn't I have found this out earlier?
Yeah.
And fixed it while I was in the house in the middle of the day. Now I'm out here under a beautiful clear sky, and you don't like my software. So then it's like, okay, it's time for plan B. Let's go get a different software that might not be so good for what we were planning on doing, but it'll work for something else. So let's just change the plan up totally.
Now you just pull the Dobsonian out and say, screw that, I'll fix it in the morning, and I'll just use the Dob.
There you go.
Wow. That's fun. So if someone new, we have a lot of new listeners, it wants to get into astronomy, what are some tips you give someone that's just starting out? Okay,
well, I've always said, and I'll stick to this, I think, forever. If you're going to go out and look at the stars, the best gear that money can buy is what you have right now. If all you have is a pair of 7x35 binoculars, well, by golly, you know what? You can see a whole lot with 7x35 binoculars. I had a pair of 7x35 binoculars that my grandpa gave me when I was a kid, and I used them things a lot. And there is just so much you can see up there. Looking at the Mellet 20 area in Perseus, or the double cluster, or M13 and Hercules, even the Orion Nebula, the Pleiades, they're all fantastic objects in a small pair of binoculars. Or one of the little $150 little refractors that you buy at Walmart and stuff.
60 millimeter, like we both started out with.
Like that. I wouldn't recommend you go buy one of those, but if you have one, use it. The best gear in the world is what you happen to have.
It does no good sitting in your closet.
Yeah. And matter of fact, that's one of the reasons I have so many telescopes. I find it easy to buy telescopes. I find it very difficult to sell them.
Me too.
Because I know that someday down the road, I'm going to find a use for that piece of gear. So it's going in my shed, and it's going to stay there until I need it again.
Yeah, I've only sold one telescope in my life, and that was my Dynascope RV6, and I've kicked myself in the butt every day since then.
You had a good one.
I did. I had a good one, and it was the first telescope I ever bought. I was in high school, and I spent I think I made $200 that summer, and that's how much the telescope cost me.
Wow.
And it was and I sold it, I don't know, 15 years ago, and I'm like, why did I do that? I just
really Dynascope was a unique scope. They had poor quality control. Mm-hmm. Some people loved them, said they're the best thing they've ever bought. Other people hated them to high heaven.
Yeah. The optics were good on this. The drive was pretty twitchy.
Okay.
On mine, yeah. I was always playing with the gears.
Yeah. And other people claim they liked the mount, but the optics were terrible. So, it was a good scope. I'll never forget that one.
It was. Now, astronomy books. Do you have some on your shelf that you've completely worn the binding out of? And what are those?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost is my Norton's Star Atlas.
Okay.
My golly, that thing, I've got probably 8 layers of tape on the binding. And the pages are all yellowed.
Yeah.
Back in the day, like we were discussing earlier, before computers and stuff, you would have to write a letter to the International, Astronomy Bulletin Company or whatever it was. I forget the name. But you would have to write them and ask them to send you comet printouts.
Yeah.
And
I think I sent them postcards or something like that, and they would attach something to them or send them self-addressed stamped envelopes. And
the International Astronomical Bulletins, I think it was called.
Yeah.
But anyways, they would send you printouts, and then I would get my postcard, and I'd sit down with my Norton Star Atlas, and I would plot the comet in pencil on that map. And at first, I thought, well, I don't want to ruin my map. So I started erasing them.
No.
Then after a while, it's like I started realizing, oh, look, I forgot all about that comet. Look, there it is on my atlas.
Yeah, that's a history right there.
I started leaving them, and now my atlas is just filled with lines and dates. And
I did the exact same thing. That's just funny. That's just funny. Yeah. Because that's how we found our way around the sky.
Yeah.
That's before computer-controlled telescopes. We were star hopping. Exactly right.
The other books of note was the AAVSO's series of handbooks. I think there were like 7 of them.
Okay.
And then there was the old favorite, the Burnham's Celestial Handbook.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, where are my? I know I've got those somewhere.
Oh, everybody does.
Yeah. I'm looking around my library. I don't see them here. They might be in the storage.
Yeah, I got a set in the house that I use only in the house, and it's pretty dog-eared and beat up. The one out in the observatory, it's crumbling at this point. It's falling apart. That was one of the things I used to do when I was imaging and the computer was just sitting there taking care of everything. I would just sit there and go through the handbooks and say, oh, look, this looks interesting. I'm going to write this down because it's not available for me to image right now, but it will be in February. So I'll write it down and put it on my calendar for next February. So.
That's cool. Yeah, there's a lot of good books out there, but you mentioned some very, very good ones. Now,
I've got 3 bookshelves in here filled with astronomy books.
That's great. Love it. So is there any additional information you want to share with our listeners about planning your observing sessions or what you do during them, or about yourself?
Well, no, I think we pretty well covered it. Just go on the internet, go find some of the websites I mentioned, travel around and find stuff. Probably the most important thing I can say about it is join an astronomy club. If you're a beginner and you don't know your way around, join an astronomy club, go to meetings, and there's going to be a lot of old geezers there with gigantic telescopes that love to talk and love to share and will help you out a lot, give you all the guidance you might ever want. I fondly remember when I think I was 18 years old, and I heard that there was an astronomy club in our county. It was clear at the other end of the county, but I started attending meetings, and there were these old boys with the old pipe mount telescopes. Everything was homemade. They ground their own mirrors. They designed all the electronics for their scopes, and these old guys had more wisdom. Yeah. They've forgotten more than I'll probably ever know about telescopes. And they took me under their wing, and they taught me how to do outreach and how to reach people and how to enjoy the night sky. And the stuff that I share today is all because of the stuff they shared with me 50 years ago.
That's true. And you do a lot of outreach too, don't you?
Well, I did up until February.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do. I usually, Dorothy and I travel all over the U.S., wherever we can, to star parties. I belong to, I think, 7 different astronomy clubs, and they all have me give presentations 2 or 3 times a year. So I get around. I do what I can. I try to reach as many people as possible. Kind of like someone jokingly said, if you teach your kids to love astronomy, they'll never have the time or money to go out and do drugs or or become alcoholics or anything like that, because they're too busy doing astronomy.
That's true. Yeah, alcohol ruins the night vision.
Yeah.
Funny. All right, John. Well, this has been fun.
It has. I always enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah. Now, if people want to,
it seems more like just a conversation amongst friends anymore when we do interviews than it does doing an interview. So,
well, that's good to hear because that's my goal. I want to make it just as informal a conversation as possible, just to have a good time. Now, if people want to get a hold of you, how do you recommend them do that? I
have a website. It's called NC Stargazer. Since I live in North Carolina, the NC, of course, stands for North Carolina Stargazer. And just go to ncstargazer.com and you'll find my links there. You'll find many of the programs that I've done in the past. I record a lot of them, or they get recorded somehow, and I post them up on my YouTube channels. But I have on the website, I list all my programs and all my talks and articles that I've written. And my email address is there, and my Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Everything's there. So
I will add a link in the show notes to your webpage where everybody can get a hold of you and see what you're up to.
All right, great.
All right, John. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It has been too. I enjoyed it a lot, and I hope we'll do it again sometime.
We will. Stay healthy, my friend.
All right. You too, buddy. Bye-bye. Right.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of The Observer's Notebook. Again, I want to thank John ONeal for coming on and talking to us about observing and how he sets up an evening's observing session. I hope you all enjoyed it. We upload a new episode of The Observer's Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. You can also listen to us on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, and that little box that listens to you inside your house. Yes, the Amazon Echo. You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon by giving up to $35 a month, where you receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. Saying that, I want to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Seidentop and Michael Moyer, for their generous support of the Observer's Notebook. Thank you very much, gentlemen. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is down below in the show notes. If you have podcast suggestions or comments or anything, you can drop me an email at commentman@commentman.net or on Twitter at ObserversNBpod. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening, and please stay healthy, my friends.